This is the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast session number 236, Maggie Wilde on Rewiring the Brain.
Welcome to the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast with Jason Linett, your professional resource for hypnosis training and outstanding business success. Here's your host, Jason Linett.
So if I told you that this week's session includes a conversation about something that my guest refers to as humane electric shock therapy, well, if that doesn't grab your attention, I don't know what else will. Hey, it's Jason Linett here, and this is an interesting conversation with someone, quite honestly, that I've just recently met. I was over in Brisbane in Australia for the 70th Annual World Conference for the Australian Hypnotherapist Association event, and walked into a presentation just simply looking at the factor that here was someone who I had not met before. Here was an interesting, sort of title for a presentation. And from walking in the door and seeing her in action was just completely blown away. And quite simply was the first person I made it a point to schedule time to share her message with you, the Work Smart Hypnosis audience. And I'd share a bit of a nuance here, something that I really loved about Maggie's presentation, which was the fact that this is something that I say to my students, or if I'm giving a workshop, either at a convention or even talking about what I can do as a hypnotist out in my local community, that there's a specific sequencing to the information that I'm going to share with you. And I'm doing my job best if, when you have a question, if sure enough, that answer to the question is the exact piece of information I'm about to go into. Which the beauty of this statement, by the way, is that it sets the frame for your presentation. You're not, let me say it politely, not being constantly interrupted with questions when very clearly you are a master of your information. There's a sequencing to it that's important. Second of all, it again helps us to better organize our content so there's a natural delivery mechanism of the information. I bring that up because there's a technique that Maggie is not just going to talk about, she's actually going to teach in this conversation. And quite openly, it's one I've already used myself. I've already used with a few clients. And what's the technical term? Damn, it's good. And as soon as I was about to raise my hand and ask a question about what it is that perhaps makes this blink, 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 eye roll technique work, she was immediately there with an amazing explanation as to what it actually gets into. What Maggie thrives upon is this conversation about looking at the most up-to-date research of the brain, neuroplasticity, research involving the limbic system, the emotional response within the mind, and then looking at it from a hypnotic perspective and simply asking the question, well, how do we make that happen on purpose? How do we do that intentionally? So a well-researched conversation and an amazing inspirational story in terms of her recovering from a rather big stroke and then using a lot of our techniques to overcome that negative mental dialogue as to what it is she might not be able to do. Now, for those of you listening from a business perspective as well, again, action-packed content, you're going to hear Maggie talk about the importance of refocusing her time. What I would often refer to, what I teach as positioning yourself at the end of the funnel. This way, people are applying to work with you. They're only interacting with you once they've interacted with your videos, with your books, with materials that really set the stage that you are the person to work with, which the benefit is it produces a better result within your clients, but also as well, on top of that, it produces a better lifestyle for you, the practitioner, to throw your focus into the work that you're doing. Now, there's a free resource that Maggie mentions in this conversation, which I've made easy for you just because it's a bit of a longer website URL. First of all, just simply head over to the show notes at worksmarthypnosis.com. Look it up for Maggie. This is episode number 236. That's where you're going to see the link to her various websites to interact directly with her and find out more about her work. And she's got a free resource that she calls the free CPR kit, Take Control of Sweet Cravings. And it's a really cool resource, which will just make that easy for you because it is a longer website. If you simply go to worksmarthypnosis.com/sugar. We'll go into the magic and we'll program the gerbils that run the internet to point that over to Maggie's website. Again, worksmarthypnosis.com/sugar. sugar. That's going to give you access to this part of her Unzip Weight, Mind, and Brain training program. And this thing is, by the way, completely free. Check that out once more, worksmarthypnosis.com/sugar. While you're there too, check out Hypnotic Business Systems.com. This is the all-access pass to my hypnosis business training library. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. You could spend all sorts of time, energy, and money trying to build the systems to build a thriving hypnotic business when I've done it for you. And you're going to be able to interact with the materials in terms of how I've built my application process for clients to come into the work that I do, in terms of content marketing, search engine optimization, Facebook marketing, and even for those of you from the ground up looking at office space and getting out into your community talking about what you do, plus a few done-for-you marketing campaigns. This program is now available as an all-access pass, and basically for the investment you would put into this program, you can see many more clients and far beyond that, recouping your investment quite quickly. Check that out over at hypnoticbusinesssystems.com. And with that, this is an amazing conversation with Maggie Wilde, the potentialist. Check this out. Here we go. Take some notes on this one. Make sure you get that free resource, worksmarthypnosis.com/sugar. And with that, let's officially jump in. Episode number 236, Maggie Wilde on Rewiring the Brain.
I was actually living in London at the time, even though I'm based in Australia. I was living in London for about 10 or 11 years, and I was studying psychology over there. This is back in the 90s, and I was in about my third year, and I was kind of feeling a bit of ambivalent. I wasn't really getting what I'd hoped to get out of the degree. And I went to a conference, and somebody demonstrated at that conference on a couple of my colleagues who I was studying with. They demonstrated on stage a stop smoking and also a stress management hypnosis. And it was the first I'd really come across hypnosis. And they mentioned Roy Hunter's book, The Art of Hypnotherapy. Yeah. And I became quite interested. I noticed my friend, who was a very heavy smoker, literally that weekend stopped, and I became very curious. And my other girlfriend, well, I know she was going through a really tough time, and she ended up seeing the hypnotist for a few times after the conference. And I just watched her kind of emotionally stabilize over a period of about 6 or 8 weeks. And I thought, this is very, very interesting. So I bought Roy Hunter's original book. Actually, years later, I was at a conference with him, and I brought that book into him to sign for me. And nice. He couldn't believe that I had a copy. It was his original print, and he didn't even have a copy of it. So it was one of his first ever books, which was super exciting, even in the original print run, which was in a kind of light blue color, which he doesn't have anymore. And so that was my first kind of introduction, really. And I just became obsessed from that point on. I haven't stopped studying it since. I haven't stopped studying the kind of conjunctive kind of therapies and things and sciences that go with it, kind of like neuroscience and epigenetics. And I just love it. Actually love everything that I can do to kind of enhance how the system works. And I see it as a system.
Yeah, I love that. And to look back to that moment of that demo, I mean, it's been a number of years, but is there something about the demo that stood out to you?
Not particularly. I was kind of very ambivalent about it. I didn't really, a little bit skeptical, I suppose, as well. I thought it was going to be a bit stagey, and I'd kind of seen some stage hypnosis. I think we had St. James, who was an Australian hypnotist who used to have a TV show here, and then when it was quite big over in the UK. So that's all I'd really known about hypnosis, was stage hypnosis up till that point. And so I was a little bit skeptical and just thought it was going to be an amusing experience. And when I actually just watched my girlfriend stop smoking, I just thought, I'm really, really confused and curious. So it kind of stimulated everything from there, and it just snowballed. Since then, it's been, golly, where are we now? Nearly 25 years or something.
Beautiful. I share a quick anecdote off of that, which is that years ago, there's the fun of sometimes here's the media appearance where they do an article about you or some sort of TV spot. And the end of the story first, the quote in the article, according to Jason Linett, quote, "Hypnosis is rather boring." I'm like, thank you. When the entire context of it was, from the outside perspective, observing the process, you know, it's a very natural experience. And it may seem that, quote, hypnosis is rather boring. And here was the kicker phrase. However, there's often some magical moments that occur inside of it for the client. And This was a reporter who saw an entire demo where at one point, open your eyes and observe a clock on the wall, which wasn't there, and like phenomenon and everything. But no, just pulled the one little quote. Hypnosis is rather boring. It's like, well, out of context.
Yep.
But to look at how, observing something that's going on, the real proof, then I love that aspect of the real proof being, well, here's the result that it got.
Exactly. And, it is, when I look at everything that I've done in media and things since, I've had similar experiences with you where, I would have been interviewed about a certain aspect of hypnosis or a certain result with a client that I've been working with, and they've just taken one thing out of context and kind of, I don't know, I think once I was being interviewed, I'd just come back from the States after winning a book award for psychology and mental health for my Unzip book. And I was interviewed on the local press here as, an Australian award-winning author, blah, blah, blah. And they asked me about the book, and I was talking about the process of brain and the process of change, and how if we change our mind, we can actually change the body permanently, etc. Or I made one comment about the fact that this book was not about food. It wasn't a diet book. And so the whole recorded TV presentation was actually on the fact that this book wasn't about food. They didn't mention hypnosis at all. It was like, what have you done? You've just destroyed the whole interview.
I love that. There's a quick lesson that comes out of that. And this is actually a topic that popped up in my business group online, which was that there were some articles on my local Virginia hypnosis website. It's like, hey, you can click this one. You could read the entire article. We've put a transcript underneath it, so it's searchable. Then there's this other article. You just see a thumbnail of that one. Sometimes the screenshot, the sort of overview perspective is what you need of it. So starting on that track of psychology, then eventually falling into the hypnosis, at what point did it actually become a service that you put out to the public?
Not for another couple of years, actually.
Yeah.
I went back to Australia after I actually didn't even finish my degree. I left in that final year because I just realized it wasn't what I wanted it to be. I wasn't actually getting what I wanted from it, and thought I might go back to it at another point later on when I got back to Australia, but never did. So for me, it was really about the transition from using it for my own perspective, which is why I really went in. I never wanted to be a therapist. I never wanted to help people in that way. I'd been a theatre and education educator prior to that.
Oh, I love it.
And I wanted to just work out what the hell was wrong with me, really. And I remember the dean of the university actually saying that on our first day when we started psychology. She came in and said, the majority of people that do psychology are trying to work out what's wrong with themselves. And I'm sitting in the audience just thinking, yeah, that's kind of me. And so when I wasn't getting the kind of results, I was understanding why I was like I was, but I wasn't actually getting any tools or strategies to change it through psychology. And when I started getting those strategies through hypnosis, I just dedicated everything that I did to working on myself with hypnosis and the kind of other tools and strategies that I learned. And people started noticing a difference in me. So after about kind of 2 or 3 years, I'd had a major stroke. I'd had a brain trauma. And so I used the skills to recover from that and was able to get back, the majority of my vocabulary, the majority of my ability to speak the way I'd been able to speak prior. And people noticed how quickly I recovered. And I started getting asked to help other people out. And then I started thinking, well, maybe I need to charge for this because it was taking up 3/4 of my week. And yeah, so it kind of evolved. It wasn't a conscious decision. It became a conscious decision probably about 7 years into practicing part-time.
Yeah, and there's a massive conversation inside of there we can't gloss over. So that experience of recovering from a stroke, what was are there any specifics of that experience that you can kind of highlight that, showcase what it was that you were doing?
Yes, I'd already been dabbling with a couple of private friends and things prior to that, as in treating them. So I'd been doing part-time work. And when I had the stroke, I was in a coma for a wee while after that, and then came out of hospital. And I'd been living by myself at the time. I'd been single, and they wouldn't release me from the hospital until I was released into the care of somebody that could look out for me. And a girlfriend took me in. She was a nutritionist. And at the time, there was so much kind of physical damage in the body as well as in the brain that if I ate something with too many enzymes in it, like a piece of fruit or a strawberry or something like that, I would actually have a seizure. And my brain, I've actually been left as an epileptic since the actual stroke. So she said to me, look, I'm really, really happy for you to come and live with me. I know about food, I know about nutrition, I know about nurturing our body that way. And if I can reteach your body how to eat without it causing a seizure, I want you to spend this 6-12 months just working on you. You have the skills. I want you to just spend every part of your day just studying how to get your brain and your body functioning again and in sync again. And so I did. I was incredibly grateful to this amazing, amazing woman. And I think she was a lifesaver, an absolute lifesaver. And I began studying neuroscience at that time, neuroplasticity and the research. One of the things I'm very good at looking at kind of raw data of research and working out how to make that kind of into a practical strategy. You look at a lot of research that comes out, and most, even doctors and things that or scientists that have done the research, they often don't see it as a practical strategy that you could translate it into. Whereas for some reason, my brain was able to see through that jigsaw puzzle even then. And so I began just researching epigenetics, researching neuroplasticity, looking at hypnosis at a deeper level, and looking at the links between the parts of the brain that were being activated by kind of what I now call control techniques, which are kind of like pattern interruptions, NLP to kind of strategies, the parts of the brain that were being affected by that and that were, if used correctly, you could influence the brain in certain ways. And then the parts of the brain that I believe hypnosis affect, and the emotional part of the brain, kind of what I call the programming, where we lay the foundation for the change that we want. And then I looked at neuroscience for the rewiring part of how do I get the permanent change? How do I get my brain to function again and remember what the ideal kind of healthy function was? And I used the neuroscience of that, if you like, to create little short rewire strategies that go for, anything from 3 seconds up to about 2 or 3 minutes that I would just do constantly every day. If I was having any kind of downtime, I was always doing those little strategies in my mind that I developed. And that's how my theory of control, program, and rewire, which incorporates not just hypnosis, it incorporates kind of pattern interruptions, it incorporates the neuroscience and also the epigenetics of how to switch off the stress around the gene, et cetera, as well. So for me, bringing all of that in together, which is where I eventually, out of that stroke, created my CPR brain training model, which is that control, programming, and rewiring, that it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had the stroke.
That's amazing. And I love the aspect of, this is actually a conversation that's popped up here before, about there's sometimes the intention of we find a technique and it works. And then we find the research that backs up perhaps why the technique works. But I love the reverse engineering of going, here's the research, here's something that they found in science. How do we emulate that? How do we replicate that on purpose?
How do we use it? How do we actually use it for our benefit rather than just as some interesting research? What can we do as a therapist and as somebody that is in the art of change to help people use that research for a practical application in their day-to-day life?
So I love the way you phrased something a little moment ago, which was that from my perspective, where hypnosis is occurring in the brain. So if you had to give your definition of the process and what's actually happening, how would you describe that?
For me, the programming, the hypnosis is all about the limbic system. So it's all about the chemical brain and the emotional brain. So if we can calm that part of our brain and switch off the control centers and the cortex, if you like, and switch off the stress response at the cerebellum, and then create that space at the limbic system to actually create the emotion, the sensation, and the energy of the output that we want, the end result that we want, without interference. So without interference from the cortex or the conscious mind, without interference from the automated programming that may be right and it may be wrong, as long as we're not getting interference from that. So that's why I use the control techniques to switch off the interference, and then the hypnotic techniques, the mindfulness, hypnosis, anything where we're really allowing that limbic system, that emotional brain, to center itself and kind of rebalance the chemicals, if you like.
Which, what's cool about that is that balance between, how does something get anchored? We either can anchor something through repetition or intensity. So would you say at times that we're doing the work to actually create that intensity of the change, but then giving the strategies to lock in the repetition and really do that rewiring? Or how would you describe that?
Yeah. So it is about the ability to create the space in the brain where the busyness of the brain and the white kind of noise is out of the way, to create the energy, emotion, the chemical of where we need to be. And then the repetition is how we get the permanent change. That repetition is helping the cerebellum, helping the automated part of our brain find the new pattern that's going to work for us and stick with it.
Yeah. And is there an example of one of these control techniques you could share? And perhaps I can politely lead towards the blink, blink, blink in the rolls.
Definitely with control technique.
I'll give you a highlight of this, which is that there was a moment I was sitting in your workshop in Australia, and I was about to put my hand up to ask a question. And I kick off my trainings with the phrase that if I'm doing my job right, when I'm about to open up for questions, when you have a question, if my answer is that's exactly what I'm about to do, that means I'm doing my job. And you demoed a technique. I was about to put my hand up, and the next thing out of your mouth was the exact answer. I'm going, oh, she's good.
Might have been a fluke. That's funny. So yes, well, I have about 30 or 40 different control techniques. And as I said, some of them will be NLP techniques. Some of them are going to be EFT, TFT, anything that you would consider a pattern interruption. One of them that I find the simplest that you've hinted at is what I call the blink and the eye rolls. And so if you were to just simply measure on a scale of intensity something that's unhelpful to you, whether it's a thought, an emotion, or a sensation, and with 10 being the most intense, and then just witness where it is in the body or the head, and then just simply blink very consciously and very slowly 3 times, and then very consciously and slowly roll the eyes in a circle one way to iron out all of what I call the little bumps and lumps. Mm-hmm. Because often when we do roll our eyes slowly, there's kind of tension points where the eyes just don't want to go, or they cut corners. You can't get a full circle a lot of the time when you first start, which means there's brain trauma. Yeah, there's some kind of emotional trauma or physical brain trauma. And so if we can smooth the eyes out in that roll and then roll them back the other way, if you then try and think of the same emotion, sensation, or thought, you literally don't have the same level of intensity. Now, for some people, it's an instant. It goes from a 10 down to a 0, and immediately you have full control and an ability to implant a new programming thought or emotion. For other people, it might reduce from a 10 on that scale down to a 7 or a 6, or it might reduce even down to a 2 or a 3. It's different for everyone. 95% of people have some kind of result from just the blinks and the eye rolls. So from a client's perspective, I find that so empowering for them, and that's the feedback I get all of the time, is that it's not something that they have to consciously go and do. They don't have to go and put earphones in and listen to an audio. They don't have to tap in front of people, in their office, or they don't have to do any of those normal kind of pattern interruption techniques that can often be very obvious. They can literally just blink and roll their eyes and feel differently inside. And to me, I kind of explain that to clients as though they've now got 3 to 20 seconds in their brain to think a different thought. And in that space, if we can then move our attention to what it is that we do want, how we do want to feel, how we do want to experience life, then within 68 seconds, you can rewire and switch the brain to produce the chemicals, the emotions, the response that you want. And then have the space in your brain to do the little rewire techniques to rewire it permanently.
And in that moment of doing the blinks and the eye rolls, are you instructing them to think about something specific or put all that intention towards the activity?
No, I'm instructing them to actually think about the unhelpfulness that they were experiencing prior. So we're kind of just using the blinks and the eye rolls as a complete pattern interruption. They're not even focusing on doing it other than to do it slowly. And I usually, if I'm in clinic, if I'm face-to-face with somebody, I'll actually use my hand and I'll close my fingers and thumb and just say blink, blink, blink. And I might even use two hands, so they're doing it at the pace that my hands are doing it. And then I'll actually use my hand to draw a circle in the air and get them to follow. So they don't even have to think about the eye rolls. They're just following instructions, and they're focusing on how the emotion, the sensation, or the thought is presenting itself in the body. And it just disappears. Somewhere in amongst the blinks and the eye rolls, the intensity dissolves.
Beautiful. And curious to ask this, because I love the framing that you mentioned about I'm not giving them an audio, I'm not giving them a complicated tapping sequence to have to do in public. My sort of phrasing around that has been, and in addition to the work that you and I are doing together live, I'm going to teach you some self-hypnosis strategies that you can do anytime, anywhere, and no one knows you're doing something.
Right.
So even if there is a challenge, you can resolve it without anyone knowing you're doing something. I'm curious if you've ever experimented with that one, with doing the eye roll with the eyes closed, if that's just as effective?
Absolutely. Yes,
Okay,
it is. Most of the time in a clinical environment, they will have their eyes closed because I've got them to assess the intensity. And whilst they're doing that, I actually just say, you might as well just keep your eyes closed there and roll the eyes whilst the eyes are closed, and then blink 3 times. And I will sometimes swap it around from an eye roll to a blink or a blink to an eye roll.
Nice. Which I'd share. The moment I was going to raise the hand in the workshop was that there is, let's kind of pull out of the context of the specifics of this for a moment, that if we set a framework of focused calibration, getting the SUD score 0 to 10, what's it at? And then, quote, something happens, followed by the question of what's it at now?
Yes.
Just that sequence of calibrate, do something, what's it at now? Just that sequencing is going to set up the inference, the implication that there should be change. So that alone as a structure can produce, I'll say, some result, not necessarily all the result. But my follow-up question was going to be, what's going on that backs this up? And immediately you were there with an explanation as to what's going on and what this is perhaps activating. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, you'll have to refresh me on the direction that I went, because I could go in a number of directions. What was the direction I went for you?
Any one of a number of directions could be a possibility, because it's where, to be fair, unless we're actually hooking up monitors to the person, I have a friend of mine who was on this program many years ago, a neuroscientist, who he goes, you have to realize that we're doing hypnotic suggestion as much as you are. He goes, yes. And he was referencing back to, what was it? The What the Bleep documentary, yes. Where he goes, someone gets up and says, every cell has a consciousness. And he goes, I'm not going to argue that yes or no, but I'll say that if instead you phrase it as research now suggests, it's as if, the way that even a stage hypnotist would go, in a moment, you'll open your eyes, it'll be as if you're on a beach. He goes, the benefit of that phrasing of going, research now suggests, it's as if this is what's occurring, is that when there's better research 15 years from now, what you've said still holds up. So you were Absolutely. Referring to something specifically around the eye roll is the moment I want to highlight here as to what may be going on, if it's bilateral stimulation, if it's something else. What would be your explanation as to what's happening with that technique?
For me, it's I kind of liken it to a very humane electric shock therapy. It's kind of it's stimulating the shock. What was that? Sorry.
I think we just need to crop it right there. It's hypnotic electroshock therapy. End of episode.
Humane hypnotic electric shock therapy.
Humane. I love modifiers. Appropriate.
One of my siblings is actually, she wrote the manual for electric shock therapy. So I've asked her over many, many decades, what is it that's working, and why can't we just use something like EFT or tapping or pattern interruptions that are going to calm, because it's not in the actual technique that is making the change or getting the results. It's actually in the relaxation afterwards, as there's moments of peace. So if you do the blinks and the eye rolls and there's a couple of seconds of peace where the brain is no longer thinking and the body or sensation is no longer experiencing what it was, then it's in the settling down of those neurons and the electrical circuitry where the healing actually takes place. Everything kind of finds its place again. And she talks about that as exactly what happens with electric shock therapy. They don't really know why it works. They just know it's not the electric shock that actually creates the healing or has the results. It's actually in the settling down of the neurons after the electric shock. And I just think there's much more humane ways to do that.
I just
Blinking and
wrote
eye
down.
rolling in particular.
Yeah, I just wrote down. It's not the technique. It's the reaction to the technique.
Yes.
And I love
And
that as a
the
theme.
process afterwards as our body realigns itself. Because, I was listening to a podcast earlier today where he specializes in autoimmune diseases in Idaho. Dr. What's his name? Briloxi, something like that. He talked about the fact that it's not necessarily the treatment itself. It's in the process that the body is always trying to find its alignment. It's always trying to find a healing balance and return to its original balanced state. And if we get the noise out of the way, then the body will do what it can to rebalance itself. And so I kind of find that hypnosis and the techniques that we use in this industry are a lot kinder to the physical body and the emotional body, and allowing the body just the space to realign itself.
Which, to look at how, even to go to an extreme example, that for some specific drugs, the feeling that the person would experience as a result of the drug is not necessarily from the substance, it's from the receptors, it's from their body, their brain, trying to get back to stasis. And that's the reaction that we're noticing.
That's correct.
Yeah. So how do we reverse engineer that? There's something that you mentioned earlier, too, that I want to go back to, about interruptions in the eye roll as being possible trauma. Is there research around that? Is there something specific we can point to? Because that's something I've heard others mention around EFT, TFT as well.
Look, I really look at it from the point of EMDR.
Mhm.
So if we look at what the studies show with EMDR, that particular parts of the brain can be holding emotional trauma or electrical trauma, really. It's kind of a stagnancy in the electrical circuitry, not flowing effortlessly, not communicating between hemispheres or not communicating between parts of the brain. And so by helping the brain, by smoothing that out in my very layman terminology, then it provides an opportunity for the brain to settle itself down again. So for me, if I see that a client is really stuck in a particular corner, whether it's upper left or upper right or lower left or right, what I usually notice then is that there's a particular emotion that might stimulate. If you just get them to hold their eyes where the stuckness is, where they don't seem to be able to get the smoothness, then usually just in that space of holding it, usually an emotion comes forward. And more often than not, there's a melancholy if it's at the lower levels, around the left, right, along the bottom, and some sort of more uplifting memory or emotion that comes forward at the top higher level. So, and again, that's just anecdotal. There's no research that I can point to for that. That's just after using this process for many, many years. And often just letting the client hold the eyes in that position and being okay with it being stuck or feeling stuck, then the softening happens and they're able to then run more smoothly the next time.
Which, back to the theme of humane, that you're not necessarily having to draw out the entire backstory, just recognizing here's an interruption, let's smooth it out. What do you notice now?
Yep.
Yeah.
What's different?
What's different? Yeah. So let's go through that user experience. So now someone is about to work with you in your clinic. How does that process typically take shape for you?
The whole process of working in clinic. So I actually only do 1 or 2 days a week now, and most of what I do is actually online anyway. I have decided, a long, long time ago to be kind to my body. And I had a very, very busy practice where we had about 5 practitioners working for me. I had a government contract for the Indigenous community here in Australia for stop smoking and for addiction and counselling, and burnt myself out. It was well after the stroke and I'd recovered, and I burnt myself out and had kidney failure as part of the reason why I had the stroke. That then got triggered and the disease exacerbated and I ended up with kidney failure. And so for me, since then, after recovering from that and using the same thing, the CPR process to recover from that, where my kidneys are now at normal stage, they were actually at stage 4, which is 1 stage away from permanent dialysis. And my kidneys are now very, very normal and have been in the normal range now for about 3 years. So for me, the process for clinic is really about how much can my body handle now. So I now get to choose the types of clients I work with. I don't work with, I mainly refer most people on. I don't work with everybody that applies to work with me. So I get to choose, maybe I might be working with 3 or 4 clinical clients at one time. And I usually work with a process. I take people on who are working through a longer term issue that's been a challenge for them over a long period of their life. And we're working through it on a therapeutic basis as well as a coaching basis, and looking at the other aspects of their life that it's affecting, such as their careers or their families and communication. So it's a much kind of broader look now, which is what I love doing. I love looking at the bigger picture in people's lives.
Right. And there may be a bit of a business strategy inside of something you just said to highlight that you said the people who apply to work with me. Could you expand on that?
Yes. And it's the same with my therapists that I take on under my publishing house. We have an application process. So people will actually apply. If I'm the right fit for them and they're the right fit for me, we'll have a little interview, whether it's on Skype or whether it's face-to-face. We have a little interview first. We get them to go away and actually process that and work, see how they sit with that after a couple of days. I work out how I feel and how it's sitting for me for a couple of days. And then if it all feels in alignment, we make a formal offer to bring them on. And I love it. I love working that way.
Yeah, which that's a big shift that I put into my business about 2-3 years ago. That, the way that I share it is that I went from getting about 20 or 30 calls a day, which sounds amazing, to now getting like 3 or 4. But the difference is now they're qualified.
Yes.
And it's a benefit to them. It's a benefit to us. And the real changes I found, it shifted the dynamic out of, I really hope this works, to I'm so excited for Thursday. I'm ready to be done with it.
Yes.
That's like,
and
wait,
I'm
they're
excited
coaching
for
themselves
too.
along the way. Yeah, exactly.
I'm excited. And actually, curiously enough, Thursday is my clinic day. I look forward to those days. I went through many years where there was relief when a client canceled because I was so exhausted and burning myself out with it, thinking because I had the skills, I should be using them and I should be helping as many people as possible. And I think that was the big shift for me when I had the kidney failure, which would be around 6 or 7 years ago. And I actually had to kind of reassess my whole world. And the contract that I had with the Indigenous community was, bringing in business for 5 or 6 therapists. It was a lot of money to let go of. And it was a big decision because, that was 3/4 of my business that I was saying, I really don't want to do this anymore. And I handed that contract across to one of my therapists and walked away from it. And I asked myself a very, very important question that up until that point, I had never asked. I had never, ever asked myself, what kind of business did I want? I just always thought that I wanted a successful business. And to me, success you must be successful if you're busy and you've got lots of money coming in the door. So that must mean you're successful. And I'd never really stopped and really analyzed that and really worked out whether it was working for me or not. My body had tried to give me lots and lots and lots of messages that it wasn't working. But it took, the last step for me was the kidney failure, where I just thought, I've been through so much. My poor body's been through so much. There's got to be better ways and bigger ways that I can help people without killing myself as well.
So if you could define the model that it became, what would that be for you now?
The model that it became is I base it on a book. So I have a number of books and I build my business around that book. So my business now is actually about, and I now do that with other practitioners as well through a publishing house. So what that was in the first instance, after I made that decision to walk away from the contract, I had written a book over a period of about 2 or 3 years, but it had sat in my inbox being edited 27,000 times.
Yes, we do.
And when I decided I wasn't going to work the way that I'd been working, I buckled down for 6 months and actually got the book to the level that it was ready to go. Just prior to literally a week before the books were due to arrive on my doorstep, I had a call from a journalist who had heard about a client of mine who'd lost over half her body weight using this particular system that the book was about to write about. And she asked to do an interview for the Sydney Morning Herald. And so I said yes, and that was fine. And it was about a week before the book was due out. And the article was maybe about 200 words. I mean, it was so tiny. And it had a tiny photo of the client and a tiny photo of the front cover of my book. Well, within about 48 hours of the Sydney Morning Herald article coming out, I got a phone call from the London Daily Mail saying that they'd seen the Sydney Morning Herald article and could they interview my client. And so I rang my client just going, well, what do you think? And she went, I don't know, okay. And so we thought they were going to do a little article. Well, it ended up being a 3-page feature.
Beautiful.
In the female edition of the Sydney Morning Herald. And that just snowballed from there. Before the book came out, we'd been in the Sydney Morning Herald, we were in the London Daily Mail, local press here in Australia, our biggest breakfast TV show called Sunrise, a bit like your Good Morning America. It got hold of it and we ended up within 10 days or so on that. A current affair, which is like an evening 7 p.m. kind of current affairs kind of program, they got hold of it and we ended up on that as well. They then wanted to interview a number of my other clients. So it kind of went a little bit
viral,
crazy, very viral before I even got hold of it. And I didn't even have a landing page or anything. In those days, I didn't even know what a landing page was.
Yeah.
And so I had no way of collecting email addresses. If people were buying it off Amazon, there was no way I could actually, collect those addresses. I did, thankfully, have a link inside the book for them to download a free brain training, a CPR brain training kit. And so that was a little bit of a saving grace. But nowadays, we're always wiser after the event.
Right. We sometimes need those moments to go, oh, wait, how do I leverage this? How do I actually make contact with people?
Exactly. So, yes, I'd made the decision after that period as I focused on the book that I wanted to design the business that would work for me and that I did still want to reach people. I did still want to be able to help people with the CPR brain training process. But to do that, I needed to prioritize my body as well. And so I knew that it had to be an online model. I knew that it had to be an automated income model as well. And that I looked at all the different kind of structures around business models and looked at the business model around a book that would leverage into workshops, would leverage into online courses, would leverage into all of those things very, very easily, keynote speaking, all of that. Right. And it just happened from then. And I've now got, I think, 9 online courses. I've got 3 physical books and about 5 or 6 ebooks that have all done very similarly. But I've now published for a number of other practitioners, and we run now a business program for practitioners to move from a very specific practitioner who's already established. They've already got that kind of overwhelmed stage where they're just about at burnout stage, and they've got an established business, but they know they just can't work that way anymore. So it's very similar to where I was 7 years ago, and we work with those kinds of therapists and help them produce their book. We publish their book for them and convert that as a done-for-you program into online courses. And I love it, and do the digital marketing for them. So It's just super exciting, and I just feel like I'm working in my genius. I just love it.
Which the beauty of that model, it's where inside of the book that I put out back in January this year, talking quite a bit inside of that around working with entrepreneurs and business owners for public speaking, which now it's not even, we can zoom out of it and say that's the sales process. But the difference is even for the client, by again, the dynamic shift of rather than I really hope this works to, I'm ready to be done with this. Yeah. That we're actually providing that better experience for the client. So as a result of all of that, are there specific categories that you're now focused on helping, let's say, as you work with people in a one-to-one or even in a workshop format?
One-to-one, they're usually actually small business owners who are having emotional trauma or communication trauma within their families or with their staff. And behind all of that, there's some kind of trauma that they're dealing with emotionally or haven't been dealing with emotionally. And so at that level, I'm working one-on-one with the clients that I choose. With clinical therapists, I love working with very, very practitioners who have a little bit of business background, who understand the principles of business, but they just might not be getting it wrong, or they thought they needed to bring in the kind of complete corporate structure into their clinical practice. And you do need some of that, but you also need to be able to align it with that therapeutic model as well. So it's often very, very hard. And that's the feedback I get from a lot of my practitioners is they've tried to do business building or publishing programs with other, publishers or book company or business coaches, but those coaches or those publishers haven't come from a therapeutic model. So they don't understand the nuances of the message that needs to get out there in their marketing or in their media.
Well, it's that discovery that the book itself is not the scaling model. The book itself is that foot in the door.
The book itself is the business card. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There's something I want to come back to that you said a little while ago, and it's the reference to 68 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Could you expand on that, please?
There has been some research, and I can't remember who it was by and there are others that say this research has now been denied, that 68 seconds is all it takes to shift the brain from one state to another state and get the wiring of the new positive state working. And so I talk about it from a concept, whether the research is legitimate or not, it still works in principle in a clinical environment as well as in a coaching environment as well with a practitioner who's going through their own kind of stuff where they're in their own way. I have this saying that it's if you say so. So whatever you're focusing on right now, whatever thoughts, language, words, emotions you're focusing on right now, even pain, then whatever you're telling your brain just simply says yes to. It's a Simon Says brain. And you are smarter than your brain if you use it wisely. And nice. If you can use a control technique.
I got to highlight that. You're smarter than your brain if you use it wisely. Was that the phrase?
Yeah, absolutely. Wisely and consciously, because your brain just follows patterns. It just follows the patterns and the instructions that it's received over the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And you're the conscious one. You are the being that is in the driver's seat. If you allow yourself to think of yourself as smarter than your brain and use that incredibly wisely by being willing to be curious about the reaction or the thought or the sensation you're having right now, and just simply witness it as wiring firing in the brain. It's not who you are. It's who you've begun to think you are, but it's not actually who you are. So if you can just curiously use then a control technique like a blink or a yawn and a stretch is another, where there is some research out where yawning and stretching just realigns the central nervous system and again acts as a pattern interruption, then you can then in that space turn your attention for 68 seconds on what it is that you do want to feel, what it is that you do want to experience or think. And within 68 seconds, all of the wiring that is wired together for that positivity will fire. But just as importantly, it's if you say so. If you continue to stay in the victim of the negativity focus, then it's if you say so too. The brain doesn't distinguish.
Right, which I love that aspect of bringing in the curiosity as a possibly obscure reference. There's the more so nowadays political comedian here in the States, Bill Maher, and he does a routine on his TV show called, I don't know if it's a fact, I just know it's true.
I love that.
Which I love that as a premise of, and there's been times I've brought that up here on the program before, the classic one being when Igor Ledahosky was in the program and he goes, the change happens when you're speaking to the client, the transformation happens in the silence. And I had to go, that just sounds so good. I don't know if it's true, but it just sounds like it is.
It sounds true. And that's
but consistently though, putting that into use and going, damn it, he's kind of right.
Yeah.
But that phrasing that, again, you're smarter than your brain if you use it wisely and consciously, and bringing in the power of curiosity. Could you expand on that, please?
I actually call it the curious detective. And that's one of the first things that I teach, whether it's a client or a practitioner. I teach them to just become the curious detective about everything in their life, good, bad, or indifferent, and then decide if it is helpful for us, then go into it with the emotion full strength. If it's unhelpful to us, then use a control technique, switch it off, and work out what you want to experience instead. Use your brain wisely.
Beautiful, beautiful. This has been outstanding. So where can people find out more about your work and your books?
My main website is thepotentialist.com, so thepotentialist.com, or the Mind Potential Academy, which has some of my online courses on it as well.
Outstanding, outstanding. And any final thoughts to share for the listeners out there?
Whatever we want, either way, if you say so, just choose your brain wisely to focus on the thing that is most important to you, and the rest is just wiring, firing.
Jason Linett here once again, and as always, thank you so much for interacting with this program, for leaving your reviews online, for reaching out to the guests as well and letting them know what you thought about their content shared on this program. Once again, check out Maggie's free resource, the free CPR kit, Take Control of Sweet Cravings. That's available online. It'll redirect over to her site at worksmarthypnosis.com/sugar. And again, check out hypnoticbusinesssystems.com, the all-access pass to my hypnosis business training library. Get out there, become successful, make it rain. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast at worksmarthypnosis.com.
Hey, it's Jason here, and reading is lame and videos are awesome. So do this right now. Go ahead and click subscribe right here inside of this video, and that will link you to my YouTube channel, and you will be the first to find out as new information is shared here online. Click subscribe now. Stay in touch. I look forward to hearing of your success very soon.